I'm here today with Andrew Miller, crime writer, talking about I guess, an experiment that you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. Why don't you first tell my audience who you are and what you do?
As you said, I'm a crime writer. I was born and raised in Ohio by conservative Pentecostal Christians who talk in tongues and flop around on the floor, stuff like that. And part of the escape from all of that scene for me was always crime fiction about LA. I knew so much about LA, but never even knew if I would ever live there. But 13 years ago, I did. I live here. I write stories usually about LA, but not necessarily always. I've had stories I wrote it down before we started so I would remember. I've had two in Switchblade, one in Broadswords and Blasters. I put a lot of stuff on medium.com, which is, I know we'll get into that. And I have one in Pulp Modern and coming up in Pulp Modern in the new one, and one coming up later this fall in Close to the Bone, as well as something I'm really excited about, LA Stories with yourself and Scotch Rutherford, a novella coming out next year.
Well, now I want to hear about your upbringing with the Pentecostal Christians and everything in Ohio.
I'd imagine that might have shed some light on some of the background in in LA Stories. There was a little bit in there that came from my own history, not the relationships in the story, but the area and some of the background. Yeah.
Hmm. What part of Ohio? Oh, let me try that again. What part of Ohio?
I was born in a little town. My family was living in a little town called Monroeville, but I grew up predominantly outside of Columbus, Ohio.
Hmm.
I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on them or anything. They're not bad people. It was just something that I didn't ever believe in at a very young age.
Yeah, okay. Did you ever go to Kings Island growing up in Ohio?
Well, so Monroeville is not too far from Cedar Point, so
Mm.
I was always Cedar Point over Kings Island.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I've never been to Cedar Point, but we used to go to Kings Island every summer. It was about 45 minutes away.
Yeah, my grandma lived on the Sandusky Bay, and you could literally see Cedar Point in her backyard. And so it was kind of like as soon as the whole culture was like as soon as you were tall enough to ride the rides, you got on those rides. And then living out here, when people talk to me about Disneyland and stuff, it's just like I was riding those crazy rides when I was like a little kid. I don't really see the appeal in going and taking pictures with a guy dressed up like a giant mouse, but to each their own.
Well, I think, yeah, I don't know. If you went to Disney as a kid, then I understand the nostalgia for it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a little bit like if you don't take drugs, it's a little bit like being on a drug because you can completely escape reality, sort
Yeah,
of. But it's too expensive, I think, these days.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Mhm.
Down there in your region of California, actually, the a closer park to Cedar Point would be Magic Mountain. I don't know if you
Right,
ever
right.
been
I haven't been since I've been out here. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was kind of a digression, but that's okay. Let's get into the controversy, the controversial part of the interview. Actually, the whole interview, I imagine, will be controversial for some people
Yes, yes.
because just discussing things these days has suddenly become dangerous. Which,
Especially the subject matter of the story that I covered that you wanted to talk about.
yeah, so let's talk about that. What was the story, and why don't you start by telling us what the story was?
Okay, so the story is called "A Killer of TERFS," and it is the second story featuring a character named Shelby Jones, who is a homicide detective. And the idea is that Shelby is a middle-aged black lesbian who is a Democrat, but largely indifferent about politics, doesn't really care about the things people are constantly outraged about on Twitter, doesn't connect her identity to all of the things that people are so concerned about. She just is a person with interest and does her job, but because of her identity, keeps ending up getting assigned or getting sort of paraded by her LAPD superiors to be the face of cases that are especially sensitive, that deal with hot button issues. And each story, ideally, this is the second one, will kind of cover a different modern relevant type issue. And this one is basically a series of gender academics are brutally murdered, and Shelby is assigned to the case, discovers that they all are part of a controversy in the world of transgender rights and transgender activism, and that they appear to be targeted for this reason, and discovers that the killer is a brutal right-wing misogynist who has been disguising himself as a woke trans rights activist who virtue signals in all of the ways that make him approved by the corporate woke atmosphere that is so prevalent in the world today. And the point of what I wanted to say with this is that everything is so hysterical on this issue that if someone wanted to take advantage of the current system, the current environment, many of the current laws, I think that they would get away with it as much as the character did in the story. I mean, he's eventually caught in the story, but the reaction to his crimes initially in the story are that people kind of support him. The media supports him because he sort of says all the right things. And I think if someone tried that, it's not, I don't know what would happen, but it's not unthinkable that it would play out that way to me.
Okay. How was that story received in general?
Well, it's kind of hard to pin down any one reaction, but so I conceived both of those stories featuring this character, and if I do any more, they'll all be on my Medium page. So this is something that I knew all along it would only be online. I don't want to only put stories online. It's not ideal for me, but it's kind of like a fight in the trench that you're given sort of a thing. And I wanted to make the most of that. And so I sort of wanted certain people to be outraged by it. I put TERFs in the title. I put a killer of TERFs. I don't want to say most, but a significant amount of the loudest activists in this world regard TERFs, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists, if for those that don't know, as nothing different than Nazis. And so, a killer of TERFs. Oh yeah, I'll click on that. That was my sort of plan with it. I received a huge amount of incredibly hateful comments, some of them so stupid that they were hilarious, some of them a little scary. And I saw, because on Medium, you see how many people stayed to read the entire story.
Mm.
It became my most read story by far. And a huge amount of people that read the entire thing clearly didn't make any comment about it at all, which could mean that they also hated it. But I suspect that there's a significant amount of those people that read it but didn't comment, that I think that they may have liked it, if I do say so myself, and I think that they knew that commenting on it isn't worth the trouble. You know, it just you there's no use in even thinking about saying something on this issue, because if you say the wrong thing, you will get attacked. You will get attacked in so many different ways. It's also something that I knew that I was going to cover this subject, and that there wasn't much of much of a reason to pursue getting it published traditionally. I think, someone like you would take the chance on it, but a normal publisher, they don't want to deal with the hassle of, online petitions. They don't want to deal with threats of their employees walking out. They don't want to deal with Antifa throwing a Molotov cocktail through the window of their offices, which is the reality of the world that we live in.
Andy, Molotov cocktails are just an idea. They don't really exist. I would just like to interject, because this is as good a place as any to say this, because one of the problems with Twitter is that complete strangers, or people who have no idea what they're talking about, can write someone else's reality, or at least attempt to. In Pulp Modern, that's the magazine you're referring to, has been portrayed by people who have no idea what they're talking about as this place where you can publish any kind of hardcore stuff, which isn't really true. But because these same idiots sort of chased away, at least on Twitter, chased away Switchblade, I feel like I have to kind of maybe bring up the slack, because there's a vacuum left there. Switchblade was the outlaw journal. That was where you sent your most outrageous work if you wanted to. And it's unfortunate. I always wanted Pulp Modern to be something you could read, like an old grandma could read in an airport. But because of this whole free speech thing, it's kind of changed. But let's get back to your story. Do you remember some of the really disturbing comments you got?
One that comes to mind as the worst was because the title is "The Killer of TERFS." It was a comment on Facebook that said, "Killing TERFs is a victimless crime." Just plain out. There were so many that, part of what happens. So, like, on this issue of TERFs, one assumption that people were making is that I am sympathetic to TERFs. I would regard myself as one. This is an issue for the transgender community. I am just someone that I just wanted to educate myself about that world. I believe that transgender people exist, that the situation that they find themselves in is something that needs to be accommodated for. But as far as that specific group, all I wanted to say with the story was, I respect the right of anyone that has that opinion to share their opinion without being abused for it. If you really look into the stuff that happened when J.K. Rowling came out as a TERF, it's insane. And she knew that, her writing is so successful that they build theme parks over it, and that was the thing that made it okay for her to have this opinion publicly, whereas so many others don't. But she was putting out, at the time that controversy happened, she was putting out a kid's book, and she was encouraging kids to read the story and to include their own artwork and to post it on Twitter. And it became an organized movement for whenever some kid did this, for anti-TERF activists to post obscene sexual pictures underneath the kids' images. It's just kind of like the people that believe this are almost always left wing. J.K. Rowling's history is that she's anti-Brexit. She was a left winger, but suddenly she's the same as like a Trump supporter. And so what I'm getting at with your comment about like, or with your question about comments, a very, very common thing was to refer to me as a conservative. Like just immediately, I have to be that, because I didn't immediately equate anyone with the opinion that TERFs have as being a Nazi. Therefore, I must be a conservative Republican. I'm not a conservative Republican. I've never not voted for a Democrat in my life. That was just something that they would go to all the time. And another thing that was just sort of, I mean, it was, I wouldn't say disturbing. It was sort of disturbing how casual it was done. But they would say things like, file that, like the comment on the story was, file this under conservatives getting mad about something they imagined. This is a fictional story. Like, I presented it as a fictional story. I've never not put like a hashtag that said fiction. It's just like, hey, Alec, you're just the guy that made up Lake County incidents, and you're supposed to be like insulted by that. It was just this constant going to that, and it was just so, I mean, it's disturbing. It's so dumb. Like, it's so dumb. And it's something that, like, you can just see when you read these comments, this is kind of like punk kids in the early 80s, getting together and saying to their parents, like, you don't understand, man. Like, it's really that. It's not, they don't have a grasp on what they're talking about. It's just something that they get a kick out of sticking up for what they believe to be a good cause, but that I don't think that they understand.
Yeah, you said a lot there that I want to get to. The first thing that I would like, so when I read your story, I learned a lot of these terms. I'd heard some of these terms, turf being obviously the main one,
Yeah.
but I never really understood what they meant. One of the things your story did, I thought very well, is educate the reader as to what these various terms mean in an objective way. So when you hear that TERFs are equated with Nazis, Nazis being a group of people responsible for the deaths of at least 6 million people, probably more. Can you give us a better idea? What is a TERF, and how can that be equated with a Nazi?
So, like, as I clarified earlier, since I'm not one, I don't want to be anyone to construe me as an expert on the issue. But as I understand it, it's people who believe that trans people exist and deserve equal rights under the law, but do not feel that subjective interpretations of gender should allow laws to be altered for issues like connected to female only spaces. A TERF might say, the idea that all a biological man has to do is self-identify as a transgender woman in certain parts of the world. They don't have to do anything but identify. They don't have to go on testosterone. That would allow them into a woman's locker room. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a woman who's experienced sexual assault in their life and they want to support a transgender person, but the idea behind that makes them uncomfortable. And the reason for the Nazi comparison um, it's immediately treated that concern, which I don't think is that unreasonable for someone to just have it. I don't think that's really that unreasonable. That's treated as an accusation that anyone who might be trans is, of course, misrepresenting and a predator who's just faking their condition, which, of course, is something that is not true. And that's not something that any TERF that I've read, that's not something that J.K. Rowling has said or any of the other people that she was influenced by, to my knowledge. They've never said anything like that. It's just the ways that the laws are currently being passed and the atmosphere about what's acceptable is creating um, an environment where a predator could take advantage if they so wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, um, a really good example of why I knew the story would be upsetting to people is there's a book that came out in 2003 called "The Man Who Would Be Queen," and this is, I think, is a psychologist. I'm forgetting the name of the author, but basically, just this author did a whole lot of studying about what makes people trans, because we know that they exist, but we don't know a lot from a scientific perspective about why. And one of the reasons, one of the sections of the book explained that a certain amount of transgender people are autogynephiliacs or autogynephiles. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but they're heterosexual men who are sexually aroused by dressing up in women's clothes. And so there was all this evidence in this book about a certain amount of trans individuals are trans because of this reason. And so to me, my brain thinks, oh, that's great. Now, we have some more information. We can, act accordingly and accommodate accordingly because this helpful information has been provided. But to the activists, that makes the civil rights end of the goal unclear. If it's just a heterosexual man dressing as a woman, but that's still a trans individual, why would they be allowed into a woman's restroom? Therefore, this author was vilified. It was this crazy coordinated attack. It was all of the attacks were about his character. He, is accused of, being predatory against the trans people that helped him out with this book. So basically, any accusation of anyone being willing to even be insincere, that becomes an that's turned into the people suggesting that are saying every trans individual is a predator, which of course is absurd. And that's the closest I can explain to why they would be Nazis. It doesn't really make sense to me, but that's the best that I can explain it.
Let me just quickly ask you about this.
Yeah.
So with what I think is sometimes referred to as identity politics.
Yeah.
In fiction, it is to many, not everyone, but to many, it's believed you should not be writing about an experience you don't personally have. So what would you say to a critic who would say, well, why is Andrew Miller writing about this issue if I mean none of this directly affects you, if you're not trans or you're not a TERF, what gives you the right to write this story?
Well, generally speaking, I think that that's just total bullshit. Anyone that wants to write a story about anything, as long as it's sincere and they're making an attempt to write a good story, they can do that. But as far as this goes, I I care about people who get fucked over in life. I genuinely do. And this issue is something that I genuinely didn't understand. And I was writing about my actual feelings for it. And so I'm not walking in their shoes, but I mean, I would say, I mean, that it is my genuine experience, because it was just something that I cared about and had sincere emotions that drove me to write it. But I mean, if somebody, wants to write a story about anything, I think that that's great. It's, it's good to walk in other people's shoes.
Yeah, well, I obviously I tend to agree with you. It's the same with acting. When they had the controversy with Scarlett Johansson, I think she was going to play a transgender woman,
Right. Yeah.
and they said, "Well, why would she do that?" Well, because she's an actress. That's why she would do that.
Yeah.
You know, um, and writing used to be about. That's one of the things that to me draws out empathy. Is that the writer is attempting to really understand someone else, someone very different. Uh, it's just unfortunate in the past. I think that maybe writers have been lazy or not done their homework, and so what they end up with is caricature or whatnot. And this is where the argument has weight.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I agree that
Yeah.
can definitely happen. Yeah. I mean, I don't think if it's just if they're just enforcing some kind of a stereotype, but as far as, this particular story, I forget if we talked about this in the past, but there's a transgender detective in the story,
Right.
and that's based on a real person. There's a trans officer named, I was just writing down little things to remember, Christine Garcia, and she's in San Diego PD. She's not, as far as I know, a detective. She's just a patrol woman, but she joined the force as a man and transitioned as a woman into a woman, and is currently still a cop. And part of what I wanted to do was to show people that just live their lives and do their jobs as this identity, that are not part of this religious like hysteria connected to politics. And so if someone were to say like that I shouldn't be writing about this, I would say, you should know about women like Christine Garcia, which the people that are so upset with this story obviously have never heard of ever. You said something about like the way that reality is written on Twitter. And like one of the things that really kind of got the idea for this character and these stories going was do you remember the story of Jussie Smollett, the
Mhm.
actor? I didn't know what had happened, but that was just something that was just so weird in the air, where this story was just believed on social media by so many people that I know.
Mhm.
I would just kind of quietly tell my girlfriend, like, this reads like a shitty actor made up a bad script for himself. And that, pretty much turned out to be the case. But I was just thinking about, like, imagine Dave Chappelle later did in one of his stand-ups, he did a bit about this, where it's like, you just imagine what these detectives who have to deal with reality are thinking, and how they're going about dealing with a case that's covered internationally in the media, and everyone's just believing these claims that just don't make any sense, but they still have to solve the case in reality while everyone sort of lives in their alternate world. And that's kind of something that in all of the Shelby stories, I'm not sure how many I'll do, but that she just keeps on encountering people that they're reading about her case on their phones where she's, dealing with it in reality, and you're seeing the contrast, which is just going to go greater and greater as time goes on.
So one of the concerns you talked about, you put it on Medium. You put the story on Medium
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't feel what it would be published anywhere else, or
I couldn't think of anyone that would, and because I mean, look, the model for the internet, the model for uh, all of the mainstream media is outrage clickbait. You don't you get people to read a story if they're outraged by it. And so I personally, like, I know a lot of people that don't really care that much for Medium. I don't consider it my main publishing outlet by any means, but it's nice. It's like, for people, I know a lot of people that it's, unfortunate, but they'll read a story on their phone. And if they're going to read a story on their phone, it's just, it lays it out pretty nicely. And so it just struck me as this is like an online story, for one, because it would fit the format, but also because it would keep people there, because many of them would be outraged. Some of the people that I talked about earlier with their comments, I was finding that they were sharing the story on their own pages, but can you believe this? Can you believe this scumbag? And of course, you can monetize your stories on Medium. So it's like they hate the story, and they clearly don't like me, but they were making me money. I'm not claiming some huge financial windfall, but it it's the most, I think, 350 people, somewhere between 350 and 360 read the entire story. And so that's not too bad. I'm okay with that. I'm going to try to outdo it next time, but I I I considered it a success. I wanted it to be my most read one.
what would you say to someone that would accuse you maybe of pulling a publicity stunt to get readers?
Um, I mean, I would say, yeah, I don't necessarily. I would think if the content of the story was cynical and insincere, then that would be something to feel bad about. But I think that the story is a good story. I think that it is a very pro trans rights story. I think that it gets people to think about this issue. And if I was thinking about another writer that had written a story like that, and they wanted to pull a publicity stunt, it's fine by me.
Well, like I said, I read it, and I learned a lot reading the story. And also, if you read the story, you do recognize that the villain is a right winger. You talked about, well, let's go back. You used the term earlier, corporate woke. What do you mean by corporate woke?
It's sort of like everywhere you go, there's just sort of like a certain type of ideology. It's just everything is so when you start talking about this, it's become, if you talk about cancel culture, it's another thing where everyone thinks you're suddenly conservative. I mean,
Mm.
cancel culture is real, but I don't want to. I'm not a conservative, so it's just like I want to talk about it, but at the same time, it's like it's not really worth getting into it. But there's a social justice ideology that's kind of purveying everywhere. In the past year and a half, it's taken over just seemingly everything, where you don't know why you're being told about someone's identity. It's just sort of brought up outside of the relevant topic of conversation. I think that the best way to treat people is, Martin Luther King saying you should judge somebody by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. But everywhere you go, everyone is talking about color of their skin or their sexual orientation. And I don't really see, when I say everywhere you go, you don't really see it. That's kind of wrong, because you don't really see it. I don't see it in the world. I see it online. I see it in commercials. I see it at sporting events. Um, it's clearly
Oh, you
just a way
froze.
to control people. It's just an idea that I don't think corporations are sincere. The NBA will clearly support a Black Lives Matter rally, but they won't let their players talk about Uyghur Muslims being put into concentration camps in China because the NBA does business with China. So it's a way for business as usual to go on while creating the presentation that everyone is suddenly, Che Guevara.
So you've kind of answered my next question, which is, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit. What purpose does, let's just call it wokeism, what purpose does that serve corporations? Why would they be interested in that?
I think that you can, if you're a if you're in the I'm trying to think of a good example. So like if you're in the ice cream aisle and you choose Ben and Jerry's because you know that Ben and Jerry's corporation is woke, you might feel a little better about yourself. I remember an article, I don't know if you read Quillette.com, but they went into the whole ethics of Ben and Jerry's and how they present themselves as woke and they're always behind social justice causes, but that they have a company that sells skin bleaching cream in India. They're just doing that at the exact same time. And so they're going to be making money wherever, but they know that the environment here is that you can make yourself feel like you did something when all you did was give the corporation a little bit more money.
Would you agree that, and I'm just throwing out my own uh, theory here. So in the past, most corporations appeared to market their products to one specific demographic. For lack of a better term, we'll just say middle and upper class white folks. At some point, did they just realize we're not making as much money as we could make if we advertise to everybody? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say because it's like the way that this stuff is so prevalent on social media. It is if someone has bought the whole woke ideology as it exists on social media, they may not actually realize that that doesn't matter in the real world.
Mm.
A good example is if I go on Twitter, um, I hear the term Latinx, which is unspeakably stupid to me. If someone cared about that term, if Latino people wanted to be called that, I would gladly call them that. The polling is pretty significant at this point, and it's something like 3% of Latino people have heard that term, and 1% say that they use it. I ask friends of mine all the time who are Latino, like, have you ever heard this word Latinx? And a buddy of mine said, like, is this something that white people invented? You know, but a couple weeks ago, Biden used it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so Biden seems to be under the impression that that's what people want to be called. It's not what people want to be called, but someone that's on Twitter clearly told him that because they were always on Twitter and they thought that that was real. And I just think that people in positions of power are they're being deranged by this false, I want to say false, but non-majority representation of the way things really are.
No, yeah. Sometimes it sounds like Biden gets all his talking points from Twitter, and I thought
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that we were over presidents using Twitter, but um, what I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I think you know that the wokist, right, the true believer in wokeism would say, well, you're just, I don't even know the exact term. It's a very technical term. What, cis, hetero,
Right,
white
right,
male?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're just a cis, hetero, white male. The system has always, you've always benefited from the system. These changes, and they would then, of course, inflect some straw men. They'd say that you're obviously threatened by. Um, what gives you the right? For instance, you said, Latinx. You think it's absurd. You said absurd or ridiculous or something. Um, because I've looked at some debates about this. Debate, of course, I'm using that word very loosely. Debate on Twitter, but there are people who at one point would be identified as Latino who say they use the term Latinx. So who are you to have any judgment of it? And I would like to open that up to, in general, why does Andrew Miller get to judge any of this woke stuff?
Well, it would, so yeah, I mean that's totally a fair question. If it's someone who is Latino on Twitter using the term Latinx, I would ask what puts them in the 1% of the people that actually use it, and why do 99% of people reject it? That would be something that I would definitely be curious to know. If I sounded judgmental, I didn't really mean to be that aggressive about it. It was more just, it's just a terrible looking word on the page. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. It's, if someone said to me that they wanted to be called that, yeah, like whatever anybody wants to be called, I have no problem. You tell me your name, you tell me what group you are. That's what I would refer to. But the fact, I was kind of undecided until I saw Latino people don't like that word. And so, I mean, that's just, I know that there are plenty of lived experiences that people could share with me that would enforce why they should be using that word. But I mean, I just think of all the Latino people I know, they don't use it. All of the data shows that most don't use it. So, why use it unless it's just some sort of empty virtue signaling thing? I would definitely like to know, why the people, that 1%, holds on to it like that. What's the reason?
Yeah. Well, I'm very much like Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca. I don't ever, or I try not to to state a position on any of these things because
Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's all quicksand. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter
For
what you
sure.
say.
For sure.
Um, my understanding, and I'm sure you've heard this, in the Spanish language, oftentimes words end with a masculine or feminine,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
either A or O, Latina or Latino. And I think that Latinx is supposed to because there's a sector of society that wants to get rid of any gender
Right.
differentiation.
Yeah.
So this is just their way of eliminating that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've like I was telling you, I periodically tell friends of, the Latinx persuasion about the term Latinx, and it's pretty awesome just to see, like, I say, yeah, you're being more gender inclusive if you use this term, and they're like, what are you talking about? They have no idea. I'm sure that's just my lived experience. So
Right. Well, I currently work in kind of a similar environment as you, and
yeah,
I imagine if I don't really talk to my coworkers, I have a lovely job where I don't have to talk to anybody if I don't want to. But I imagine the reaction would be the same. I think that Latinx, in fact, all of the wokeism, the woke terminology, it comes from the universities.
yeah, sure.
I witnessed this same stuff that's now part of the mainstream society. I witnessed that in college classrooms in the early 1990s. It was confusing to me then, and my response at the time was to just smoke a lot of pot and pretend I wasn't hearing it. Um, but I sobered up many years ago, and lo and behold, it has worked its way into the mainstream. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of argument today. So you, in your experiment, because you wrote, and the word of the day, the missing ingredient from modern arguments and conversations is nuance.
Right.
Nuance is something that a lot of the social media, I don't know. I don't want to use any of these. I don't want to use SJW. I don't want to use virtue signaler. I don't know what, I don't want to categorize the faithful, but they do have a tendency to just, you're either with us 100% or you're a fascist, Nazi, Trump supporting, all the terms that they put, and it's all one big basket. Um, how do you think we've gotten to a place where there basically can be no discussion? There's no discussion taking place about any significant or controversial, especially controversial subjects. I'm old enough to remember when people had no problem discussing anything controversial in the right setting. You didn't discuss it at the Thanksgiving dinner table, but sitting around in a dorm room, passing a bong, we had very nuanced conversations about race and gender and all these things. Now it's just either or. What? How have we gotten here? And do you see how this culture, this society is going to move past? Because this is a tar pit. This is what killed the dinosaurs. So I think it's safe to say it's a stage that we need to move past. And how does that happen?
I definitely agree. I mean, I think the number one thing is social media. That's the biggest thing that's changed it. There are, politics on both sides, and definitely the media doing everything they can to um, dismantle the concept of nuance. But the biggest thing, I think, is social media. It's just this experiment that people have been doing on their brains. I don't know. I don't want to declare myself someone that's well adjusted with social media, but I do definitely feel lucky. I'm 37. I remember when there was none, and I remember when it started. It's just like certain types of people, like, just certain boomers that I know are just constantly on Facebook sharing yet another, Daily Wire article to 0 to 1 likes over and over and over again. Like, just, it's deranged their minds. Whereas the younger generation, all they know is likes. So it's like, that's the only way that they can see that their personality has worth. They've never had anything but social media in their lives. And so that someone that's growing up with, all that I need is a like, you're not going to get a like with nuance. You're not going to get someone appreciating something with nuance. You need a good picture. You need a good title that's going to get someone to do a like, or someone that's going to do an outrage emoji to show that they're just as outraged as you are. And that's really just what it's all about. I think that if people can find ways to just develop a more nuanced approach to social media, I don't know that I have it, but when I took all of the notifications off of my phone, I was a happier person within weeks immediately. Like, I didn't need to see some page that I follow on Facebook was telling me something. I could just wait till I got home and look it up. My girlfriend, she reads a lot of stuff online, but her main thing, she likes going on to look at cat pictures, things that make her happy. And you can find a focused approach to really focus on the things that you really like, but until it's more than just how people see your profile on whatever social media site you're on, there's never going to be any nuance. It's sad. It's really sad.
Do you think the death of nuance, or at least the cryogenic freezing of nuance next to Walt Disney, do you think that, how do you think that plays into the current debates regarding free speech?
Ooh, I mean, I would hope that my story is that we talked about earlier was a nuanced story, that people would think that. And as I said, it was always conceived as something for people to find when they were on social media. Literature can help people understand things. And if more people try to find ways to insert nuance into social media, I think that that's going to help. But no, honestly, it's a good question, but I really don't know. Scary to
Well,
think about sometimes.
yeah, the free speech debate in its somewhat more civil incarnations, uh, basically it boils down to people who believe that an individual has a right to express any opinion, whether it's offensive to someone or not, versus people who think you do not have a right to offend anybody. And I've heard since actually I first noticed this with the Donald Sterling case.
Right, yeah.
Um, the NBA took his team away from him for a private conversation he had with his girlfriend, I guess. And some people said, well, stealing his or taking his property, and people argue whether or not it was his property, was an inappropriate response to that. And what I heard the first time there was the NBA is a private organization, which I also don't think is true, but the NBA is a private organization. They can do what they want. And ever since then, especially with social media, obviously, they say Facebook is a private company, they can do what they want. Twitter is a private company, they can do what they want. Is the argument that the what we should say the anti-free speech crowd is making, is the argument that the rights of a corporation or business are more important than the rights of a private citizen?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be what they're saying, and it's you put a gun to my head, it's going to be, I'm going to say that what would need to happen would be that they need to break up the power of the social media companies the same way they broke up all of Rockefeller's oil companies, um, because it's a bunch of you know privileged woke kids deciding what goes on social media or not. And if you want to get something said in this country, you basically have to go on social media, and having their totally inconsistent biases be the regulators of what people say it's just not a sustainable situation. For the most part, I do understand the perspective of, Twitter has rules. President Trump violated those rules over and over and over again. He was on his way out. They saw that there was no more money to make, so they banned him to make themselves look good like 2 weeks before he got out of there. It's like, I do understand that perspective, but yeah, I mean, he is the president. I do not like anything that he said on there, and it was much better when he was gone. But it should be some other kind of situation where, um, I'm an atheist. If I said something, uh, negative about Islam, Facebook and Twitter will, you violated community standards. It's a ridiculous, but for Islamophobia, something like that. So it's like if I have a problem with some sort of repellent act that some extremist made that is entirely endorsed by scripture, I get in trouble on social media. That shouldn't be the case. It's not a sustainable situation. So I would hope that something like that happens eventually, but I don't. I mean, it just, everything is such a mess. It's hard to even imagine how that would occur.
Finally, well, actually not finally, but you said, with respect to the comments, the majority of the comments you got on your story, you said something very simple. You said it was so dumb. And why, what kind of society are we creating where people who are obviously dumb have more power? Because these people have a lot of power
Yeah.
and they're very dumb. There's no other word for it. They're extremely dumb. Like in 5-year-olds would be embarrassed by their behavior.
No, for sure. It's like, a lot of the comments on my story, it's just, it's dumb, but in the same way that I've heard you talk about people that sort of follow you around online and harass you, that you've said, like, these like wounded people. It's just like you have to remember that. You have to remember that there's what they're not remembering, that there's a human being behind there. It's a lot of these, it was, I would say, if I had to put a number on it, I would say 45% of the people that put the worst comments were all from Portland on my story. And it's just, when these
Shocked.
kids,
I'm shocked.
when they lose, they lose their virginity and they realize that their degree didn't give them the job that they thought it was going to. I think the lack of nuance in their comments and stories like that, they'll see down the road, um, that it was stupid. They'll see that, one rule that I had whenever I put that story up was I'm never going to engage. I'm never going to let them see that it bothers me. And it's like yeah, I'm a human being. A nasty comment directed toward me, it does bother me, but it's for the most part pretty meaningless. And I hope that more people both can see that those people who are making such stupid comments, that they are human beings with motivations that are driving them to do that, and hope that they'll learn the error of their ways someday to just try to be the better person. And just meanwhile, just something that came to mind talking about free speech. It's just I always loved when Christopher Hitchens would debate free speech, and someone would hit him with, yeah, you have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. And they would be in a theater, and Hitch would look out to the crowd, and he would yell fire. He would just do it immediately as soon as they were done. Just got to keep doing that, and just gotta not let them get to us. It's just that's I hope that causes them to someday change. As much as I embrace noir and fatalism and nihilism, I deep down I see myself as an optimist.
What percentage do you think of the people who sent you nasty comments were actual transgender?
There was that's a good question. Maybe a quarter. And to be fair, off the top of my head, I don't know, because I don't know for sure if it was a transgender individual, but there was one that was incredibly thoughtful. I don't know if you remember, the victim at the beginning of the story is she's with her African American boyfriend when she's attacked, and it says that she was reading Linda Sarsour, who is the theocratic anti-Semite who was involved in the Women's March. I don't really like her, and this person made a detailed comment about how TERFs probably wouldn't read that person, and it was a really thoughtful thing. And so it wasn't all uniform, but I would say 20%, 25% maybe.
Mhm. Okay, I was just curious. All right, before we go, let's quickly talk about LA Stories.
Yeah.
Yes, LA Stories, three novellas under one roof. Uh, One by me, one by you, and one by Scott Rutherford. Basically, that is right there the powder keg for controversy. I really don't know of three more controversial writers at this point. When I was younger,
I was very like I was like touched when you guys were basically saying you thought mine was the most disgusting. I was like, whoa.
yeah, that for context, we're talking about LA in 1979 and Hollywood in that era, which was, or that area, excuse me, that which was looked very much like a grindhouse movie. I've started editing mine, and every time I read mine, I kind of think it's the most interesting thing I've written, even though it's disgusting and filled with all kinds of nastiness. Uh, and the other day I caught on Tubi, I think I watched the Toolbox Murders because I once had lunch with the writer of the Toolbox Murders, the original Toolbox Murders, and she's a woman and she's one of the sweetest people you ever meet. But the Toolbox, I was watching, I was just like, oh, this is an LA story. This would fit right in with LA stories. I'm sure in the back of my mind when I wrote my novella for it. I was thinking of like Don't Answer the Phone, Maniac, Basket Case, even though that's in New York. Those last two are in New York. But just that super grimy, and yeah, the reason that your story, so we go from mine, which is on Hollywood Boulevard, to Scotch's novella, which takes place mostly in a motel, to yours, which deals with more affluent
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I think it's with the affluence that makes it even dirtier. Because these are the best people in society, right? Always the people who have money are considered the best, and yet we know they often do the nastiest shit.
For
Like,
sure. For sure.
and I think your story really brings that out. Your novella brings that out. I'm very excited. I think that what LA Stories is the future of indie publishing. That's my prediction right now. It's
I'm really excited for people to read it.
yeah, January
Yeah.
2022.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, Andy. Well, this was a great conversation, and as I always, anytime I have a good conversation on this channel, I always say we're gonna have to bring you back for another one. So,
I'd love to.
yeah, especially if you write another story that is a bit of a lightning rod for controversy. We
Yeah,
definitely
I've
want.
got kind of I don't know when I can really get to it right now, but I have something that's similar to TERFs in the works. I'm kind of outlining it.
Okay, well, I look forward to it.
Awesome.
All right, thank you for talking to us,
Yeah, thank you.
and hopefully
See
we'll
ya.
talk again.
Yeah, for sure.